It's strange how a single October morning can feel so ordinary, and yet mark the beginning of something that will haunt a whole town for decades. Atlanta, Georgia. October 29, 1997. The air was crisp, the kind that carries the faint smell of rain and pine trees. Autumn had already set in, painting the trees in shades of amber and rust. On campus, most students were getting ready for midterms, but Chloe Miller wasn't thinking about exams that morning. She never really did. Chloe was 22, a literature student at Emory University. She was the kind of girl people described as sweet but distant. She always seemed lost in thought, her notebooks filled with half-finished poems and coffee stains instead of class notes. Professors said she had talent, that if she just focused, she could be brilliant. But Chloe didn't believe them. She never really believed she belonged there. She lived off campus in a small rented apartment, the kind with thin walls and neighbors you never met. Most nights she stayed up late reading or listening to cassette tapes. Fiona Apple, Mazzy Star, bits of the 90s melancholy that seemed to speak directly to her. She wasn't failing out of school exactly, but she was close. Her friends said she needed a break, a weekend to clear her mind. That's where the idea came from, a short hike at Sweetwater Creek State Park, just 30 minutes outside Atlanta. The group was made up of 4 girls: Chloe, Tessa, Megan, Laura, and Jade. They'd known each other since freshman year. To anyone else, they looked inseparable, the kind of girls who always sat together in the cafeteria, shared makeup, and laughed too loudly in libraries. But like many college friendships, theirs was built on fragile ground. There was always competition, unspoken jealousy, the kind of small betrayals that pile up quietly. Tessa was the center of gravity in that group, tall, confident, effortlessly charming. She had a way of making everyone orbit around her. Chloe admired her, maybe even envied her. They'd been close once, but something had shifted lately. Friends noticed tension, small eye rolls, awkward silences. And then there was the rumor, something about a guy Tessa had dated and Chloe had been seen talking to after class. No one knew the full story, but the air between them had been tense for weeks. That morning, Chloe almost didn't go. She'd texted Tessa the night before, well, paged her back then, saying she wasn't feeling well, that maybe they should go another time. But Tessa insisted. "You need fresh air," she'd said. "It'll be fun. Stop overthinking." So, Chloe gave in. They met at the parking lot near the entrance of the park around 9 a.m. Megan brought snacks, Jade had a small map, and Tessa carried a yellow disposable Kodak camera, the kind you wind after every shot. They joked about taking cute forest pictures, about how one day they'd look back and laugh at their fashion choices. Chloe smiled, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. She wore an oversized gray sweater, ripped jeans, and her brother's old flannel tied around her waist. Her brown hair was pulled back loosely, a few strands falling in front of her face. Tessa teased her for looking like a sad poet, and Chloe just laughed it off. But she felt small in that moment, like she always did around Tessa. The hike started easy, a wide dirt trail winding through tall oaks and birches. The girls chatted about college gossip, exams, and plans for Halloween. Every now and then, Tessa stopped to take pictures, one of the creek, one of the old mill ruins, one of the group together. In the photos, everyone looks happy. But if you stare long enough, you can see it. Chloe standing slightly apart, her smile softer, uncertain. As they went deeper into the woods, the air grew cooler, quieter. The sound of the creek echoed faintly in the distance. They stopped near the water to rest. That's when things began to unravel, just a little. Lara mentioned something offhand, something about the guy, the one from the rumor. She didn't mean to stir trouble, but Tessa took it as a jab. "So, Chloe," she said, her voice sharp under a laugh, "did you really think I wouldn't find out?" The others went silent. Chloe froze, staring at her friend. "Tessa, I didn't. It's not what you think," she said softly. But Tessa didn't let it go. She had that tone, half teasing, half cruel, the way only someone close to you can hurt you. "You always play innocent," she said. "Maybe that's why people walk all over you." Chloe's eyes welled up, but she turned away before anyone saw. She muttered that she just wanted to walk alone for a bit, clear her head. No one stopped her. Lara later said she thought Chloe just needed a minute. Megan said she tried to call after her, but Chloe didn't answer. Tessa said nothing. Chloe walked off, following the narrow trail deeper into the trees. The others waited a few minutes, then packed their things and started heading back. The plan was to meet near the car in an hour. But Chloe never came back. When the sun started to set, the girls began to worry. They retraced their steps, calling her name, their voices echoing through the forest. The park was big, hundreds of acres of thick woods and rocky paths. As the light faded, panic began to creep in. Megan wanted to call the police, but Tessa insisted Chloe was probably just trying to make a point, that she'd show up any minute. She didn't. By nightfall, they finally called 911. Rangers arrived first, then deputies. They swept the area with flashlights, their beams cutting through the fog that had started to roll in. They found Chloe's backpack near the trail, a few feet from the creek, unzipped, her notebook half wet from the moisture. Inside were her wallet, her keys, and the disposable camera. No sign of Chloe. The next morning, helicopters hovered over the park, search dogs combed the area, and volunteers lined the trails. Chloe's parents drove from Marietta as soon as they got the call. Her mother was hysterical, her father silent, pale. Reporters began to show up by noon. At first, police thought maybe she'd slipped near the water. There were rocks, slippery ground. But divers found nothing. Then came the other possibility, that she'd gotten lost and succumbed to the cold overnight. But no footprints, no clothing, no remains were found. It was as if she just disappeared. The media went wild. College girl vanishes in Sweetwater Forest. Her face was on every news channel in Georgia for weeks. The picture from her student ID, the one she hated. Her friends were interviewed repeatedly. They gave the same story. They'd argued a little, she'd walked away. They couldn't find her. But investigators noticed something odd. Their timelines didn't perfectly match. Small inconsistencies. One said Chloe left around 3 p.m. Another said 4. One claimed she saw her near the creek. Another swore it was farther up the ridge. And Tessa's tone was cold, detached. She cried on camera, but detectives noted how quickly she composed herself when the camera lights went off. Days turned into weeks. The search was eventually scaled back. Every lead went nowhere. By December, the case was already losing attention. And by the new year, Chloe Miller's name was slowly fading from the headlines. Another missing girl in a state with too many of them. Her parents refused to give up. They printed flyers, held vigils, and met with private investigators. But no trace ever surfaced. No body, no witnesses, no answers. It was as if Sweetwater Creek had swallowed her whole. And yet, somewhere out there, beneath the same rust-colored trees where she was last seen, a secret waited, untouched, buried by time and silence. The kind of secret that would take a decade to resurface. The morning after Chloe disappeared, Sweetwater Creek didn't look any different. Same rustling leaves, same soft hum of water sliding over stone. But for the search teams walking the trails that day, everything about that forest felt wrong. They said it was the silence, too heavy, too still, like the woods themselves were holding their breath. Deputy reports described it as one of the most extensive searches the county had conducted in years. Over 50 volunteers, park rangers, K-9 units, even a helicopter, all combing through mud, branches, and thick brush. But by sunset there was still nothing. Not a shoe, not a piece of fabric. It was like she'd stepped off the trail and vanished into thin air. Tessa and the other girls were questioned at the site that same evening. They sat wrapped in blankets near the ranger's station, their faces pale, eyes red from crying. Still, something about them, the unease, the way they avoided certain questions, didn't sit right with investigators. When asked to describe exactly what happened, their stories overlapped, but never fully lined up. Megan said Chloe walked off after an argument, heading north toward the falls. Jade thought she went south, back toward the parking lot. Lara said she'd seen her near the ridge before losing sight of her. And Tessa barely spoke. She kept staring at the forest, jaw tight, hands clenched. The sheriff pressed her gently. "When's the last time you saw Chloe?" Tessa blinked, then looked down. "By the creek," she said. "She was crying. I told her to come back. She didn't listen." It sounded believable enough. But there was a pause, just a second too long before she answered. And in that pause, something felt off, a flicker of guilt, maybe, or fear. Reporters descended on the park within days. News vans parked along the dirt road, and cameras flashed as officers carried maps and boxes in and out of the ranger station. The case caught fire across Georgia. A young woman vanishing in broad daylight, surrounded by her friends. It was the kind of mystery that gripped people's imaginations, the kind that made mothers pull their daughters closer. Within a week, every local channel was covering it. Interviews with classmates, professors, neighbors, everyone had something to say about Chloe. She was quiet, kind, too trusting. Her professors mentioned how she'd been falling behind, how she sometimes drifted during lectures. Her friends described her as fragile but good-hearted. And Tessa. She appeared on camera once, hair perfectly brushed, voice trembling, saying she just wanted her friend to come home. But behind the scenes, detectives were starting to suspect that maybe the story wasn't so simple. They'd found something odd in Chloe's notebook. Pages ripped out, fragments of a poem that seemed directed at someone. You said I was safe, but your eyes said otherwise. It wasn't much, but it hinted at tension, maybe even fear. Police combed through her apartment too. It was tidy, quiet, a single bed, stacks of books, old receipts, unpaid bills. There was a half-written letter on her desk addressed to her mother. I think I need a break from all this noise, it read. Maybe I'll come home after finals. Nothing pointed to a planned disappearance. Nothing pointed to anyone else either. It was the kind of puzzle that left every possibility open. By the second week, the park was mostly cleared. The search officially shifted into investigative mode. Interviews, lie detector tests, timeline reconstructions. The girls were questioned again, separately this time. This time, Tessa's version changed slightly. She said she and Chloe had argued about something personal, that it wasn't about a boy, that people were twisting it. But when detectives pressed for details, she froze. Her eyes darted, and she said she didn't want to drag anyone's name through the mud. They took note. The disposable camera found in Chloe's backpack was developed and analyzed. Most of the photos were harmless: trees, the creek, a blurry squirrel, the group posing in front of the old mill ruins. But one picture stood out. It was the last one taken on the roll. The girls were standing together, smiling, except Chloe wasn't looking at the camera. She was looking off to the side, toward the trees. Her expression was uneasy, almost startled. No one could explain it. That photo would later become infamous, printed in newspapers, debated endlessly online. Some said she'd heard something. Others claimed there was a faint shape, a figure, hidden in the shadows behind her. But back then, in 1997, investigators dismissed it as just a trick of the light. Weeks passed. Leads dried up. A witness claimed to have seen a young woman hitchhiking along the main road the day after the disappearance, but the description didn't quite fit. Another said they saw a green pickup truck parked near the trailhead, engine running, no driver in sight. But the plate number was never recorded. Every night, Chloe's mother called the sheriff's office asking if there was news. Every night she heard the same answer: nothing yet. By December, the case went from active search to missing person ongoing. The flyers faded under rain, the media moved on, and Chloe's friends went back to school, trying to pretend things were normal. Except they weren't. Rumors spread on campus. Some students said Tessa and the others knew more than they were saying. That maybe something happened, an accident, a fight gone too far, and they panicked. But there was no evidence, no confession. Just whispers in dorm hallways and a quiet emptiness that hung over every conversation. The following spring, Tessa dropped out for a semester. She told people she couldn't handle the stress, that she needed to be home. Megan transferred to another college. Jade and Laura drifted away. The group dissolved, just like that. Chloe's family held a memorial that May, though no body was ever found. Her mother couldn't bring herself to call it a funeral. I still feel like she's out there, she said during the service, clutching a candle so tightly it trembled in her hand. Years rolled by. The park remained open, hikers passing the same trail without knowing what happened there. Every few months, someone claimed to see a ghost, a girl in a gray sweater near the creek, vanishing when approached. Locals called it superstition, but deep down, everyone knew. Sweetwater Creek hadn't forgotten. And yet, the case files sat collecting dust in the county evidence room. Until one afternoon in 2007, 10 years later, a family hiking near the old ruins stopped to rest by a small clearing not far from the main trail. Their dog began digging near a fallen tree, barking nonstop. The father walked over to pull it back and froze. What he saw beneath the loose soil made his blood run cold. A skull. Within hours, the area was taped off. Detectives, forensic teams, and reporters flooded back to Sweetwater Creek, almost exactly where the story began a decade earlier. The medical examiner's initial report confirmed what everyone feared. The remains were human, female, young. Buried shallow, wrapped in fragments of what used to be a flannel shirt, and among the dirt and roots, a silver pendant. The letter C engraved on it. After 10 long years, Chloe Miller had finally been found. But that discovery was only the beginning, because soon investigators would uncover something even more disturbing. Something that would change everything they thought they knew about her disappearance. Chloe hadn't died in 1997. She'd lived for nearly 2 more years. The discovery of the remains hit Atlanta like an echo from the past, a sound no one expected to hear again. For a decade, Chloe Miller's name had become almost mythic, the kind of mystery people whispered about at dinner tables, then forgot as new headlines took over. But in the fall of 2007, her story came roaring back into the light. That morning, the crime scene at Sweetwater Creek was sealed off with yellow tape. Reporters gathered along the trailhead, their breath visible in the chilly October air. Deputies stood guard, pushing back cameras as investigators knelt in the dirt. The clearing where the remains were found wasn't far from where Chloe's backpack had been discovered 10 years earlier. Maybe 300 yards deeper into the woods, near a rotted shed, half swallowed by vines. The bones were fragile, weathered by time, but surprisingly intact. Nearby, searchers unearthed scraps of clothing. Fabric from a gray sweater, the remains of denim, and the flannel her parents recognized instantly from photos. The silver pendant, the one engraved with a single C, confirmed what everyone already feared but couldn't quite believe. When the coroner's office officially announced that the remains belonged to Chloe Miller, her parents didn't cry. At least, not at first. Her mother later said it felt like being told her daughter had died all over again. Only this time, there was no hope left to cling to. "I used to dream she'd walk through the door," she said quietly in an interview. "Now I just dream of her leaving that forest." Within days, the case was reopened. Files were pulled from archives. Tapes rewatched, interviews transcribed. Detective Marcus Ellery, a seasoned investigator who had joined the department after the original case went cold, was assigned to lead the new task force. He'd grown up in Atlanta, remembered seeing Chloe's face on missing posters as a teenager. "It stuck with me," he later said. "Because she looked like any one of us, like someone you might pass in the hallway and never think twice about." The first step was the autopsy. After 10 years, the body was mostly skeletal, but bones tell stories long after flesh fades. The forensic anthropologist noted healed fractures in her left wrist and ribs, injuries sustained months apart. More chilling, though, was the condition of the bones themselves. They showed no signs of animal disturbance or long-term outdoor exposure. That meant Chloe hadn't been in those woods the entire time. In fact, experts estimated that she died sometime between late 1999 and early 2000, nearly 2 years after she disappeared. The revelation changed everything. Detectives gathered in the conference room the next morning, coffee cups in hand, the air thick with disbelief. "If she didn't die here," Ellery said, pointing at the map spread across the table, "then where the hell was she for 2 years?" The room fell silent. They started by revisiting the old statements, the friends, the park rangers, even random hikers from 1997. So much had changed in 10 years. Some people had moved away, others had families. But the group of girls, Chloe's friends, they were still traceable. Tessa lived in Florida now, working as a real estate agent. Megan was married, teaching in Alabama. Lara worked for a travel agency in Chicago. And Jade, the quiet one, still lived near Atlanta, working part-time at a bookstore. Ellery called them all in, one by one. Jade came first. She was nervous, fidgeting with her rings. "We were young," she said softly. "I still think about her all the time. I wish we hadn't argued that day." When Ellery told her Chloe had been alive for 2 more years, Jade broke down. "That can't be true," she whispered. "She was gone. We looked everywhere." Next came Megan. She seemed detached, more defensive. "We didn't kill her," she said before he even asked. "I don't know what else to say. She just walked off." But Tessa's interview was different. She arrived confident, composed, like someone who had rehearsed for years. She expressed sympathy, grief, all the right emotions, in all the right places. Yet when Ellery told her about the new timeline, something flickered in her expression. A single heartbeat of confusion or fear. She was alive, she asked slowly. For 2 years? That doesn't make sense. Her voice trembled slightly, then steadied. I don't know anything about that, detective. I told you everything back then. He studied her carefully. The years had changed her. Sharper features, colder eyes, but the guardedness was the same. Something in her tone told him she knew more than she'd ever said. But without proof, he had nothing. The investigation widened. Detectives combed property records around Sweetwater Creek, looking for any cabins, sheds, or rental spaces that could have been used to hold someone. They found dozens of small, privately owned plots. Hunters, retirees, people who lived off the grid. One name kept surfacing. Raymond Hale, a local handyman who'd owned a small cabin less than a mile from where Chloe's body was found. Hale had died in 2001, a heart attack according to the death certificate. No family, no known criminal record. On paper, he was unremarkable, but neighbors remembered him differently. They said he kept to himself, rarely talked to anyone, and often burned trash late at night. One man mentioned something odd, that in the late 90s, he'd heard a woman's voice coming from the cabin. He thought maybe Hale had a girlfriend, but he never saw her. When Ellery heard that, something clicked. The team obtained a warrant to search what was left of Hale's property. The cabin had long since been abandoned. Dust, cobwebs, rot. But in the back room, beneath the warped wooden floor, they found something chilling. A section of chain bolted into the wall, still intact. Nearby, scraps of old bedding, a rusted tin cup, and fragments of clothing that didn't belong to a grown man. Forensics collected every item. Back at the lab, they found trace evidence. Hair fibers, faint but recoverable. When compared to Chloe's mitochondrial DNA, it matched. She had been there. That discovery changed the course of the case completely. The image began to form, a terrible, quiet story hiding in plain sight. Somehow, after leaving her friends that day in 1997, Chloe had crossed paths with Raymond Hale. Maybe she'd been lost, or maybe he'd followed her. Either way, she never made it out of the forest. Hale had taken her, kept her alive somewhere for nearly 2 years before finally killing her and burying her near the same woods where she'd vanished. But there was one question no one could answer. Why now? Why, after 10 years, had the forest finally given her back? As the news broke, the public's shock turned into collective grief. Vigils were held again. Old footage of Chloe smiling, that soft, shy smile, played on every local channel. Her parents stood before cameras once more, older now, grief carved deeper into their faces. "We just want to know," her father said quietly. "What happened to our daughter during those 2 years? Who did this to her?" Detective Ellery promised he'd find out, and for the first time in years, he meant it. Because couldn't shake a detail that kept gnawing at him. Something small, something from the evidence log. When they dug up Chloe's remains, among the debris was something that didn't fit. A silver key, corroded but still readable, with faint etching on its handle, H23. It didn't match the cabin, nor her apartment back in 1997. It was a key to something else entirely. Detective Marcus Ellery didn't sleep much those first nights after Chloe's remains were found. The forest had given up its secret, but only part of it. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the trail where Chloe walked alone, the creek glinting in the late afternoon sun, and the memory of that disposable camera, the blurry final photo tucked into the backpack that had been left behind. Something about the scene didn't sit right. Something was missing. He pulled all the old files, the interviews, the original photographs, even the rough sketches made by park rangers at the time. Every word, every detail was examined under a microscope. And then there was the cabin. Hale's property, abandoned, decaying, but it held evidence that had survived a decade. The hair, the fabric, the chain fixed to the wall. It painted a horrifying picture. Chloe hadn't just vanished into the woods, she had been kept somewhere, alive, controlled, unseen. But there was a puzzle. Hale had died in 2001. Why hadn't Chloe been found sooner? Why had he buried her so close to where she was first reported missing, almost as if taunting the world? Ellery dug into Hale's life. He was an ordinary man on paper, maybe even forgettable. a handyman, divorced, no children. A neighbor described him as quiet, helpful, but odd. He'd lived alone in that cabin for years, often burning trash late at night. One woman recalled seeing a girl at the edge of the property, just a glimpse through the trees. She thought it was one of Hale's nieces or a cousin visiting. It wasn't. Ellery's team went through every detail. Phone records, vehicle registrations, property ownership. Anything to trace where Chloe might have been held. The silver key found with her remains became the focal point. Etched with H23, it didn't match any locks at the cabin, but perhaps it had once opened a small storage shed or a basement compartment. They canvassed the area around Sweetwater Creek, old hunting cabins, forgotten storage units, sheds hidden by overgrown trees. A local man recalled years back seeing a locked shack farther into the woods that he had assumed was abandoned. Nothing about it had seemed unusual at the time. But now, Ellery thought, that could be where Chloe had spent months, maybe years. Meanwhile, the girls from 1997 were interviewed again. This time, the questions were sharper. They were no longer asked to recount vague memories or plead ignorance. Ellery needed specifics: the exact time Chloe left them, whether anyone followed her, whether anyone had threatened or pressured her before the hike. Megan repeated that she had tried to follow Chloe but lost her. Lara claimed she didn't see her leave the main path. Jade cried quietly, admitting she felt guilty for not saying anything about the argument that day. And Tessa maintained her story. But now, with the timeline of Chloe being alive for 2 years, her silence was suspicious. Ellery began to notice inconsistencies in the statements. Subtle, almost imperceptible. Times that didn't match, descriptions that shifted depending on who was telling them. It wasn't proof, but it was enough to make him dig deeper. At the lab, forensic teams analyzed the fabric from Hale's cabin. Hair strands, fibers, and even faint fingerprints were found. Some matched Chloe, others could not be identified. Every piece seemed to confirm the worst-case scenario. She had been held captive. Investigators also looked into Hale's digital footprint, as limited as it was in the late 90s. His few phone records showed strange calls to areas near the park, numbers that didn't belong to any known friend or relative. Ellery wondered if those calls were to suppliers, accomplices, or maybe just random checks. There was no way to know for certain, but the pattern suggested someone carefully planning and monitoring. Ellery visited Chloe's parents again. They were older now, their grief harder, more settled into the background of their lives. Her mother showed him the backpack, the disposable camera, and the notebook she had kept all these years. Every page of Chloe's handwriting, smudged and careful, told the story of someone trying to understand the world, and of someone slowly being trapped in it. That camera, Ellery said, holding the developed photos from that fateful hike. This last shot, she looked scared. She knew something. Her mother nodded, tears filling her eyes. I've always felt she didn't just wander off. She didn't get lost. Something happened. For the first time, Ellery began to feel the scale of the horror. Chloe hadn't just been missing. She had been living through something unimaginable. And the key question haunted him every night. Who had done this? Then, a breakthrough came almost by accident. A retired neighbor of Hale's mentioned that he'd once bought a storage locker near the outskirts of town, which he claimed was for stuff he didn't want lying around. That locker had long been auctioned off, sold to another owner. The current owner was tracked down, and when Ellery obtained a search warrant, the locker yielded a small collection of items, journals, receipts, and a few personal effects that didn't belong to Hale. Among them were a pair of shoes, women's size 8, old, dusty, but recognizable from photographs of Chloe, and a bundle of letters. The handwriting was shaky but unmistakable. They were addressed to nobody, but the words were clear. Desperate pleas, accounts of daily life, attempts to escape. Chloe had written them herself. Reading those letters, Ellery understood for the first time the level of endurance Chloe had shown. She had lived through years of captivity, confined, manipulated, and finally murdered. The letters described her days, her hopes, and her terrifying realization that no one knew she was alive. It was a chilling revelation. She had survived so long, alone, controlled, powerless, only to be taken in the end. At that moment, the investigation shifted from finding Chloe to finding the truth. Ellery and his team reconstructed Hale's life in meticulous detail, mapping his movements, talking to anyone who had seen him, revisiting old sales receipts, and even tracing the furniture he sold, hoping to find items that had once held Chloe or that she had used. They discovered that he had lived with secrecy and planning. His cabin had been modified subtly, hidden compartments, reinforced doors, places to keep someone confined without drawing attention. The chain attached to the wall wasn't just a cruel fixture, it was a system. And somewhere in that forest, he had made sure Chloe had no chance to be found for years. The public was riveted as the story unfolded. The newspapers ran the timeline, the hike, the argument, her disappearance, the decade of waiting, and now the horrifying revelation that she had been alive, unseen, until the day she died. People couldn't comprehend it. They wanted justice, closure, and answers. Ellery, for his part, didn't let up. He began coordinating with digital forensic specialists to trace any remaining links. Hale had left a trail of receipts, notes, even photos, and every piece helped build a picture of his movements and mindset. Slowly, the identity of Chloe's captor, the mechanics of her confinement, and the evidence of her last months began to take shape. And yet, for all the pieces, there was still something missing. The final moment, the act that ended Chloe's life. The world had waited 10 years to learn what happened. Ellery was determined it wouldn't be another decade before the truth was known. Raymond Hale had been an unremarkable man on paper, the kind of neighbor who waved politely, smiled faintly, and retreated into his small, weathered cabin. No one suspected that behind those peeling wooden walls, hidden among the underbrush and old tin roofs, a secret had been kept for years. A secret that would horrify anyone who knew the truth. Detective Marcus Ellery went back to the cabin with a sense of grim purpose. Even after 10 years, even after the world had almost forgotten Chloe Miller, the cabin seemed alive with memory. A memory of her last steps into someone else's control. Every splintered floorboard, every warped plank of the ceiling, every faded wallpaper strip spoke of ordinary life on the outside and unimaginable terror within. The first team to enter had found the chain bolted to the wall. But the more Ellery inspected, the more he realized how systematic it had been. It wasn't just a random measure of cruelty. The cabin had been modified in ways that allowed someone to live inside without detection. Hidden compartments, small storage spaces, nooks and crannies designed to keep a person unseen. He imagined Chloe navigating the cabin's small dim corners, every sound amplified, every shadow threatening. Neighbors remembered Hale as quiet, polite, and reclusive. But a few things stuck out. He was often seen moving boxes at odd hours, sometimes late into the night, or burning trash that smelled of chemicals or food. One man remembered a woman's voice coming from the cabin late one evening, soft, fearful, almost pleading. At the time, he dismissed it. He assumed it was a visitor. He never saw her leave. Ellery walked the property methodically, noting footprints, depressions in the soil, areas where the grass had been worn away. Even now, years after Hale's death, the cabin seemed to whisper the story of what had happened inside. It was a silent witness to cruelty, to patience, to control. The forensic team continued analyzing the items recovered from Hale's cabin and the storage locker. Old clothing, scraps of bedding, a handful of photographs, letters Chloe had written but never sent. The letters were heartbreaking. They spoke of loneliness, fear, hope, and quiet resistance. She described her attempts to escape, small gestures of defiance, and the terror of being watched constantly. It was chilling to read. For nearly 2 years, she had been trapped in this man's world, living day to day, fearing the next step, hoping someone would find her. Ellery sat in the cabin for hours, piecing together the timeline. From the moment she left her for friends in the woods, Hale had somehow found her. Whether it was chance or premeditated, she had become part of his isolated existence. The cabin was evidence of meticulous planning. It wasn't a crime of passion. It wasn't random. It was calculated, cruel, and deliberate. Investigators also re-examined the original disposable camera photos. The last photo, Chloe staring off into the trees, unease etched across her face, now made sense. Hale had been watching, waiting. Perhaps he'd been nearby that day, hidden among the trees, studying her, choosing the exact moment to strike. That single photograph became a chilling testament to his presence, to his patience. Neighbors recalled Hale's odd habits, locking doors when no one visited, keeping odd hours, and in one instance, forcing a neighbor to carry heavy boxes of wood and supplies without explanation. Over time, investigators began connecting these seemingly minor details, the movements, the behavior, the obsessive secrecy. They painted a picture of a man who could plan, wait, and manipulate without anyone noticing. Then there was the silver key found with Chloe's remains. H23, etched faintly along its handle. Cross-referencing Hale's known properties, Ellery found that the key didn't fit anything at the main cabin, but he noticed a small abandoned shed just beyond the property line. It had been overlooked for years, tucked behind thick undergrowth, almost invisible to the casual hiker. The key matched the lock. Inside, the team found remnants of bedding, a few tattered blankets, and scattered personal items. Forensics confirmed trace evidence, fibers and hair that matched Chloe. She had been there, kept confined in the shadows of that shed, under the control of a man who appeared normal on the surface but harbored something monstrous beneath. Interviews with old neighbors revealed subtle signs of her captivity. Small noises, fleeting glimpses of movement, a shadow passing the window late at night. They didn't recognize her as missing because she was kept so carefully hidden. Hale had engineered a prison in plain sight, a space no one would suspect. The horror of the case was not only in what Hale did, but in the sheer audacity of it. He had held a young woman for nearly 2 years, in a city bustling with life, in a park where people hiked daily, and he had done it with a terrifying efficiency. Calculated, patient, hidden in plain sight. Ellery's mind kept returning to Chloe, how she survived, how she endured. The letters revealed her resilience, her strength, and her growing awareness that no one was coming to help. Yet, despite everything, she had kept hope alive. The letters spoke of moments of quiet bravery, trying to memorize the cabin layout, testing the chain, noting small windows of opportunity to escape. She had lived under unimaginable fear, but had never surrendered her mind, her spirit. The final days were the hardest to reconstruct. Based on forensics, it appeared Chloe attempted to escape once more, maybe even tried to fight back. That's when Hale acted, and the life of Chloe Miller, so painfully endured, was finally extinguished. Ellery walked the property again as the sun dipped behind the trees, the late October shadows stretching long across the cabin. He could almost see her, a small figure in gray, cautious and trembling, moving silently, trying to survive. And he could feel Hale's presence, long gone, leaving only traces of control, manipulation, and cruelty. Every item collected, the bedding, the letters, the key, even the tiny photographs, became part of the evidence chain, documenting not just the crime, but the reality of Chloe's last years. As the investigation unfolded, Ellery realized something. The case wasn't just about finding a killer, it was about acknowledging the years Chloe had endured, the quiet, hidden suffering. Every detail mattered, the chain, the cabin, the shed, the key, her letters. They told a story of endurance, of terror, and finally, of revelation. And somewhere in that revelation lay the truth, that Hale, a normal man in the eyes of the world, had lived among them while hiding a secret that would haunt Atlanta for more than a decade. The detective knew the next steps were crucial. They had the evidence, the location, and the story. But the final puzzle, the full chain of events, how Hale captured her, how he kept her alive, and how she finally met her end, still needed to be pieced together. And it was in the details of those last months, hidden in letters, fibers, and faint memories, that the world would learn the full scope of what Chloe Miller endured. The discovery of the cabin, the shed, and the key had opened a door that no one had dared to imagine for 10 years. But Detective Ellery knew that uncovering physical evidence was only part of the battle. To truly understand what had happened to Chloe Miller, he needed to reconstruct her life during those lost years, the silent days spent in captivity, the moments of fear, and the final moments before her death. Forensic psychologists were brought in to analyze her letters. Each page revealed more than just words. They revealed a timeline of survival, subtle attempts at escape, and the evolving relationship between victim and captor. The writing was careful, almost coded at times. Small observations of Hale, details about the cabin, and patterns in his behavior that she tried to commit to memory. She noted the way he slept when he left for errands, the brief moments he was distracted. Every detail mattered. Chloe's intelligence and observational skills likely kept her alive for as long as they did. One psychologist noted. She was studying him, tracking him, and looking for a way out, all while under unimaginable stress. Ellery sat in the lab, reading the letters one by one. In one fragment, Chloe described a fight with Hale. "I pushed back today. I don't know what came over me. I thought he wouldn't hurt me. But I saw it in his eyes. The control slipping, fear turning into anger." It became clear that her final months were marked by increasing tension. She had attempted more than one escape. Evidence from fibers and fingerprints suggested she had managed to touch the lock on the shed's door, perhaps in an attempt to break free. There were scraps of torn clothing and scratches on the walls, marks of a struggle that ended fatally. At the same time, Ellery and his team went back to the old case files, re-interviewing anyone who had seen Hale or might have noticed unusual activity near the creek during 1997 to 2001. Each memory, no matter how vague, began to paint a clearer picture. A neighbor recalled strange noises late at night. A hiker remembered seeing a small, pale figure slipping into the woods near Hale's cabin, moving quickly, almost silently. The pieces began to fit together like a puzzle. The investigation also revisited Chloe's friends from the day she disappeared. Ellery, careful not to point fingers, asked detailed questions about their hike, the argument that had occurred, and the moments leading up to her disappearance. Tessa's story remained vague, and her hesitance grew when asked about certain details. Others admitted they had followed Chloe after the fight, briefly, only to lose sight of her. Whether intentional or not, those moments may have been the last chance anyone had to intervene. DNA analysis of the fibers and hair found in Hale's cabin, combined with the letters and clothing, created a conclusive link. Chloe had been held captive there. She had not wandered off, nor had she disappeared by chance. For nearly 2 years, she lived in secret, and the cabin became her world, a prison meticulously designed by Hale. The media had returned to Atlanta as the story unfolded. Journalists ran daily updates. Chloe Miller's hidden years revealed. The cabin in the woods. A girl survived for 2 years in captivity. Public grief mingled with outrage, and the city collectively recoiled at the idea that such cruelty could occur so close to home. Ellery and his team worked tirelessly to map Hale's actions during that period. Using his known movements, property records, and the timeline from Chloe's letters, they reconstructed a terrifying narrative. He would leave her alone in the cabin for hours or days at a time, sometimes bringing food, sometimes not. He monitored her, controlled her, and ensured that the outside world had no clue she was alive. The forensic team discovered faint marks on the interior walls, evidence of escape attempts, and traced DNA from objects Chloe had touched. The more they uncovered, the more detailed the timeline became: how she lived, how she hid, how she fought to survive. Every detail confirmed her resilience and the calculated cruelty of Hale. Finally, the team examined the circumstances of her death. Based on skeletal injuries, scratches, and the condition of the chain, it was determined that Chloe's final moments were violent. She had attempted to flee, and in response, Hale acted to ensure she could not leave again. It was a chilling revelation, the kind that left detectives silent for hours. Ellery reflected on the tragedy. Chloe's courage, the injustice of those years, and the quiet endurance that had kept her alive long enough for her story to eventually be told. "She survived longer than anyone could have imagined," he said. "And now we have to make sure she gets the justice she deserved." The evidence was now overwhelming. Hale's cabin, the shed, the letters, the clothing, the key, all pointed to one conclusion. Chloe Miller had been abducted, held captive for nearly 2 years, and ultimately murdered by Raymond Hale. Ellery coordinated with prosecutors to bring the case before a special review board. Though Hale was deceased, the case had implications for those who may have aided him, those who could have prevented the tragedy, and the broader community. The letters and detailed forensic evidence allowed them to document the crime fully, ensuring that Chloe's story could be told with clarity and truth. Chloe's family attended each briefing, holding on to every piece of evidence, every photograph, every letter. For them it was both heartbreaking and comforting. Finally, the truth was emerging, and the years of uncertainty, the relentless questions, were beginning to be answered. Meanwhile, Ellery worked to bring closure to the community. He held meetings with local authorities, park officials, and neighbors, explaining how Hale had hidden in plain sight, how the cabin had been modified, and how meticulous planning had allowed him to commit such a crime unnoticed. The story was horrifying, but it was necessary. Finally, after months of painstaking work, the narrative of Chloe's final years was complete. The timeline was clear, the evidence irrefutable, and the horror of what she endured fully documented. It was a story of resilience and tragedy, of a girl who had survived years of captivity, fought for freedom in small ways, and yet was ultimately taken from the world too soon. And it was a story of the meticulous, almost invisible evil that had hidden behind a facade of normalcy. Chloe's letters, the key, the clothing, the chain in the cabin, were more than evidence. They were testimony. They were a voice from the past, whispering the truth of what happened, insisting that no one forget. Ellery stood in the cabin one last time, imagining Chloe moving quietly through the dim corners, hiding, hoping, fearing. He thought of her bravery, her ingenuity, and her suffering, and he made a silent vow. Her story would not end in obscurity. The world would know what happened, and her life, though cruelly cut short, would not be forgotten. The word arrest felt almost ironic in this case. Raymond Hale had been dead for more than a decade. He wouldn't face a courtroom. But Detective Ellery and his team understood that justice wasn't about putting a man behind bars. It was about documenting the truth, exposing the horrors, and giving Chloe Miller's family the closure they had been denied for years. The first step was compiling the evidence into an airtight case. A full reconstruction of Hale's life during Chloe's captivity. Every photograph, letter, scrap of clothing, fiber, and trace of DNA was catalogued meticulously. The chain in the cabin, the shed in the woods, and the mysterious silver key were all pieces of a puzzle that now formed a complete picture. They had proof that Chloe had been held, that she had struggled, and that Hale had ultimately killed her. Legal teams worked alongside the investigators to determine the best course of action. Even though Hale was gone, there were still practical and symbolic steps they could take. They could file posthumous charges, officially identify him as the perpetrator in court documents, and establish legal acknowledgement of the crime. This would not bring him to justice in the conventional sense, but it would formally recognize the atrocity he had committed. The prosecutors also explored the possibility of bringing charges against anyone who might have assisted him, knowingly or unknowingly. Hale had lived alone, but records of purchases, vehicle rentals, and minor construction work raised questions. Did anyone provide him with tools, supplies, or access without knowing the full story? Could anyone have intervened? Though no accomplices were found, the investigation forced the community to reckon with how such a crime could occur without detection. The courtroom became a place for truth, even without a defendant. Chloe's family attended hearings, sitting quietly as prosecutors read the reconstructed timeline, presented forensic evidence, and detailed the letters she had written during captivity. Her mother clutched her father's hand, tears silently tracing her face. As they listened to the life their daughter had lived in secret, the fear, the courage, the hope that persisted even under unimaginable circumstances. Reading Chloe's letters aloud was perhaps the most emotional moment. Her voice, captured through the words she had left behind, resonated across the room. Judges, lawyers, and spectators alike felt the weight of her experience. The long days of confinement, the careful observation of her captor, the desperate attempts to escape. It was a haunting reminder that she had survived mentally and emotionally far longer than her physical life allowed. One letter in particular captured the essence of her struggle. She had written, "I will not let him see me broken. I will hold on to who I am. Someday someone will find me, and they will know I fought." That statement became a guiding principle for the legal team. They weren't just recounting facts, they were honoring Chloe's fight, her resilience, and the life she had maintained even in the shadow of terror. Outside the courtroom, the city of Atlanta followed every detail of the proceedings. News outlets ran continuous coverage, juxtaposing the images of a young, smiling Chloe from old photographs with the chilling reality of her final years. Community vigils were held again, candles flickering in the crisp night air, as people who had never met her expressed sorrow, outrage, and solidarity. The legal proceedings were meticulous. Each forensic report was scrutinized, each letter authenticated, and every scrap of evidence cross-verified. Defense lawyers, if Hale had been alive, might have tried to contest the timeline or challenge the forensic interpretations. But in his absence, the case became an official acknowledgement of what had occurred, a posthumous judgment that left no room for doubt. Chloe's parents were allowed to speak during hearings, their voices breaking at times, but carrying a weight that no document or photograph could replicate. "For 10 years, we held on to hope," her father said. "We hoped she was alive, somewhere, fighting. We never imagined what she endured, but we will honor her, and the world will know who she was and what he did." The public response was overwhelming. Letters poured in from strangers moved by her story. Support groups for families of missing persons referenced Chloe as a symbol of resilience and the importance of never giving up hope. Investigators, journalists, and ordinary citizens alike reflected on the lesson of vigilance, community responsibility, and the hidden dangers that can exist even in seemingly safe places. Ellery watched as the story unfolded, knowing the work wasn't over. There were still unanswered questions. How had Hale managed to live unnoticed with such a secret? How could someone survive for so long without detection? And most importantly, how could Chloe's story continue to inspire change? In the courtroom, the final acknowledgement came in the form of a detailed judgment and official documentation of Hale's crimes. Though he could not be punished, his actions were formally recorded, ensuring that history would remember the truth. The judge spoke of Chloe's courage, the painstaking investigation, and the lessons for the community. Every word was a tribute to a life that had been stolen, but not silenced. After the hearings, Chloe's family visited the woods where she had disappeared and where her remains had finally been discovered. They brought flowers, photographs, and a quiet reverence. Standing near the cabin's ruins, her mother whispered, "You survived in every way that matters. We'll never forget you." Ellery reflected on the case as he walked through the same woods. The story of Chloe Miller was one of unimaginable suffering, yes, but also of endurance and human spirit. She had fought, observed, and preserved herself mentally in the face of overwhelming fear. Her story, now fully documented, ensured that her life, her courage, and her struggle would never be forgotten. And in a way, justice had been served, not in the conventional sense. Hale would never face a jury, a prison, or public punishment, but through truth, acknowledgement, and remembrance. Chloe's story was now an enduring testament to the horrors of captivity, the resilience of the human spirit, and the importance of never letting a case be forgotten. As the sun set over the Atlanta skyline, casting long shadows across the creek and the ruins of the cabin, Ellery made a quiet promise. Chloe Miller's story, though tragic, would live on. Every future investigation into missing persons, every community awareness campaign, every family still hoping for answers, would carry her name. Because in the end, the story wasn't just about a girl lost in the woods. It was about a girl who fought in silence, who endured against impossible odds, and who demanded to be remembered, not as a victim, but as someone who lived, resisted, and finally, through the perseverance of those who never gave up, was known. Even after the courtroom proceedings and the official acknowledgement of what happened, the story of Chloe Miller didn't end. In many ways, it had only just begun, not in tragedy, but in memory, in reflection, in the quiet ways her life and struggle would ripple through the community, the city, and the families who listened and learned from her story. Chloe's parents had returned home, carrying with them both grief and a fragile sense of peace. Their daughter had been found, her ordeal documented, her name cleared of the ambiguity that years of missing person reports had left hanging. They held on to the letters she had written during captivity, the photographs she had left behind, even the small personal items recovered from Hale's cabin and the storage shed. Each object was a relic of a life stolen, but also a testament to resilience. Her mother often sat by the window, reading passages from Chloe's writings aloud. Friends and neighbors would stop by, some for comfort, some to understand, all wanting to honor a girl whose story had haunted them for more than a decade. Her father began speaking to local schools and youth groups, sharing the cautionary tale of Chloe's disappearance and survival, a reminder of awareness, vigilance, and the importance of community. In the city of Atlanta, Chloe's story prompted conversations that had long been avoided. Authorities and community leaders began revisiting protocols for missing persons, improving communication between park officials and law enforcement, and investing in search and rescue training that could prevent another tragedy like hers. The woods where she disappeared became more than a scenic park trail. They became a symbol of caution, of remembrance, and of the fragility of trust. Detective Ellery reflected often on the years spent piecing together Chloe's life and death. He thought about the 2 decades of unanswered questions, the gaps left in evidence, and the slow unraveling of truth that eventually revealed the full horror. Every photograph, every fiber, every letter had been a clue, a breadcrumb leading him through the labyrinth of secrets that Hale had so meticulously created. The hardest part, Ellery said to a colleague one evening, was imagining her every day, living in that cabin, seeing the world only in glimpses, wondering if anyone would ever find her, and knowing we had to tell that story right. Every detail matters, every nuance matters, because it's all she has left. Community members visited the site where her remains had been discovered. Some left flowers, some simply walked quietly among the trees, reflecting. Hikers often paused at a small plaque installed near the edge of Sweetwater Creek, reading Chloe's name and the years she had lived. It wasn't just a memorial, it was a lesson, a warning, and a tribute to resilience. Chloe's friends, those who had been with her on the hike the day she disappeared, had come to terms with their roles in the past in different ways. Some expressed guilt, some relief at finally knowing the truth, and others simply mourned the girl they had known and lost. There were tears, apologies, and reconciliations, all underscoring the enduring impact of what had happened. Over time, the letters Chloe had written were carefully preserved and, eventually, shared with law enforcement training programs, crime prevention seminars, and survivor advocacy groups. Her observations about Hale, the subtle methods of control, and her attempts at self-preservation became part of educational resources. A tragic yet invaluable guide for understanding captivity, manipulation, and the mind of a perpetrator. Ellery visited the ruins of Hale's cabin one last time. Standing among the broken boards, the remnants of the chain, and the shadows where Chloe had lived, he felt a deep mixture of sorrow and respect. The cabin had been a prison, yes, but it had also been the stage for her silent courage, her intelligence, and her determination to survive as long as possible. He imagined her moving through its corners, memorizing details, testing limits, and preserving herself, even under constant fear. Chloe's legacy extended beyond family and friends. Her story became a symbol in Atlanta and beyond, a story of survival, endurance, and the consequences of a world that sometimes turns a blind eye. Advocacy groups cited her case to improve policies for missing persons, to train investigators in understanding captivity cases, and to remind communities of the need for vigilance and care. For her parents, there was still grief, the kind that never fully leaves. But there was also solace, the kind that comes from knowing the truth, honoring the memory of a daughter who had been stolen from them, and ensuring that her story would endure. They planted a small garden near their home, flowers that bloomed in late October, the month Chloe had disappeared. Every petal, every stem was a silent tribute to her life, her courage, and her spirit. The city continued to grapple with the story. News programs revisited the case, podcasts told it in episodes, and articles highlighted Chloe's resilience. Each retelling emphasized the girl who had survived for 2 years in captivity, the girl whose fight had been unseen, and the girl whose life demanded to be remembered. And through it all, Detective Ellery carried her story with him. He knew that law enforcement often deals in facts, evidence, and procedures, but Chloe's story was different. It was emotional, human, and visceral. It was about a life that had endured terror and still demanded recognition. And it was about a community learning to see what had been hidden in plain sight. In the quiet moments, Ellery imagined Chloe free, walking through the woods, not as a captive, but as herself. He thought about her smile, her laughter, the friendship she cherished, and the hope she had carried into those last years. Though her life had been cut short, the impact of her endurance and the lessons her story provided would echo through generations. Her letters, her belongings, and the story of her captivity became a testament to survival, to the pursuit of truth, and to the relentless human spirit that refuses to be erased, even in the face of unimaginable cruelty. In remembering Chloe Miller, the world remembered not just the tragedy, but the strength, intelligence, and courage of a girl who endured more than most could imagine. Her story became more than a case, it became a mirror to society, reflecting the need for awareness, empathy, and justice, even when justice cannot come in the form we expect. And so, as the shadows of Sweetwater Creek stretched long in the late afternoon sun, and as the city of Atlanta continued its life around the quiet forest, Chloe's story remained alive, whispered in the wind, carried in letters, and etched into the memory of all who refused to forget. She was gone, but she was remembered, not just as a victim, but as a survivor in the truest sense, a girl who had fought in silence, and whose voice finally, after so many years, was heard.